Lucas and Sofia seemed like the perfect duo, one a successful businessman, the other a quiet, trusted housekeeper. But when Amelia Jacobs, Lucas's wife, disappeared without a trace, a deadly secret emerged between them. What began as an affair soon spiraled into a chilling plot that would end in murder. How far were they willing to go to cover up their betrayal, and who would ultimately pay the price for their lies? The Jacobs family lived a life that many would envy, a life that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Their home was a grand multi-story mansion nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, behind high gates and surrounded by well-manicured lawns and towering oak trees. It was a picture of tranquility, a place where the hustle and bustle of the outside world seemed far away. Lucas, the patriarch of the family, was a successful businessman, known in the community for his sharp mind and charismatic personality. His wife, Amelia, was the epitome of grace and elegance. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile, the perfect mother to their two young children, a boy and a girl. Together, they were the kind of couple everyone admired, a beautiful family living in a beautiful home, with a life that seemed to hold no secrets. But beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. The outward appearance of their perfect life had started to crack in recent years. Amelia, once vibrant and full of life, had begun to withdraw. She was still the loving wife and devoted mother, but her eyes betrayed a deep sadness. The warmth and energy she had once radiated seemed to have dimmed, replaced by an air of uncertainty. She had begun to sense that something was off with her marriage, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Lucas, on the other hand, had grown more distant. Long business trips and late nights at the office had become frequent, and though he always returned home with a smile and a reassuring word, it felt more and more like a mask. The strain in their relationship didn't go unnoticed. Lucas's frequent absences left Amelia to manage the household on her own, and her growing sense of isolation began to take a toll on her. She found herself spending more time with their children and less with her husband, who seemed more preoccupied with his work and less concerned with their family life. Despite the glitzy exterior of their world, the cracks in their marriage were impossible to ignore. To help manage their large home, the Jacobs family employed a staff. Among them was Sofia, a quiet and efficient housekeeper who had been working for the Jacobs family for almost 2 years. She was in her late 20s, soft-spoken and reserved, with an air of professionalism that made her well-liked among the staff, but she never became too familiar with the family. Her job was to ensure that the house ran smoothly, from cleaning the massive rooms to organizing the laundry and preparing meals. She had a calm presence, a stark contrast to the sometimes chaotic energy that came with a busy household. Amelia had trusted Sofia, but there was always something a little too distant about her. She was polite, but there was always a sense that Sofia kept to herself, never engaging in conversation beyond what was necessary for her work. Amelia had never given much thought to Sofia's personal life. The young woman was just another part of the household staff, someone who was there to do a job and not much more. But Sofia's role in the Jacobs family was about to change in ways that no one could have predicted. In the shadows of their seemingly perfect life, a dangerous and twisted affair was beginning to take shape. It would start quietly, as most affairs do, with stolen glances and lingering touches. Neither Amelia nor the children had any reason to suspect the dark undercurrent running beneath the surface, but that would soon change, and nothing would ever be the same again. It was a cold November evening when Amelia Jacobs was reported missing, and the news quickly sent ripples of shock through the quiet neighborhood. Lucas had come home from a routine business trip, only to find the house eerily still, the front door left ajar, and his wife nowhere to be found. The family's large home, usually filled with the sounds of children's laughter and soft conversation, felt unnervingly silent. His first instinct was panic. Amelia wasn't the type to just leave without a word, especially not with the children at home. Her purse and phone were left behind, which seemed even more strange. The housekeeper, Sofia, was nowhere to be found either, but this, at first, seemed irrelevant in the midst of the crisis. Lucas immediately contacted the police, his voice trembling, as he explained the situation. He appeared distraught, genuinely worried, but his anxiety was unsettlingly controlled. He told authorities that he had no idea where Amelia had gone, or why she would leave. The children, too young to grasp what was happening, were confused and frightened. But there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry, and everything in the house seemed as though it had been left undisturbed. Searches were conducted over the following days, both in the immediate vicinity and in the surrounding area, but there was no trace of Amelia. The community rallied around Lucas, offering their help and support, but the days stretched on without any breakthrough. As weeks passed, the search efforts began to dwindle, and the investigators started to grow more concerned about the lack of evidence pointing to any logical explanation. There were no fingerprints or clues that suggested foul play, no ransom note or signs of an abduction. It was as if Amelia had simply vanished without a trace. At first, Lucas continued to cooperate fully with the investigation. He gave interviews with the media, his eyes red-rimmed with grief, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. He spoke about how much he loved his wife, how they had been a happy family, and how desperate he was to find her. But as the days wore on, something seemed off. The urgency in his voice began to fade, replaced by a strange calmness that raised questions among those closest to him. The police were starting to take a closer look at him. One of the first red flags came when they questioned Sofia, the housekeeper, about Amelia's disappearance. She had been with the family for years and had no known enemies, but when asked about the night Amelia vanished, Sofia's responses seemed oddly vague. She couldn't recall any details of the evening, and when pressed, she mentioned that she had left the house early that day. But neighbors later reported seeing her car still parked in the driveway long after she was supposed to have left. Sofia's story didn't seem to add up, and investigators began to wonder whether she knew more than she was letting on. Lucas's behavior became more peculiar as well. He had begun spending more time with Sofia in the days following Amelia's disappearance. At first, it was just small gestures. Sofia was helping with the children, offering Lucas comfort as he mourned his wife's disappearance, but soon it became more. They were seen together on several occasions, often talking quietly or sharing moments of laughter, as though the tragedy that had torn their family apart was forgotten between them. This growing closeness between Lucas and Sofia wasn't lost on those who were watching closely, and it raised further suspicions. The police had no concrete evidence to connect anyone to Amelia's disappearance yet, but Lucas's behavior, Sofia's suspicious actions, and the growing sense of unease among those close to the family made it clear that something wasn't right. The investigation was far from over, but it was becoming increasingly apparent that Amelia's disappearance was not as simple as it seemed, and as more details came to light, the dark undercurrents of the Jacobs family's perfect life would soon be revealed, secrets that would send shockwaves through the entire community. As the investigation into Amelia's disappearance dragged on, the authorities began to focus more intently on the people closest to her, primarily her husband, Lucas, and the housekeeper, Sofia. What initially appeared to be a simple case of a missing person was slowly evolving into something far more sinister. While Lucas remained outwardly distraught, the inconsistencies in his story began to mount. His alibis didn't always add up, and his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He became defensive whenever questioned, his once controlled emotions now tinged with irritation. The police, initially cautious, could no longer ignore the mounting suspicions. It was the discovery of a series of late-night phone calls that first raised a red flag. Forensic investigators had examined Lucas's phone records, tracing the number of times he had been in contact with Sofia in the weeks leading up to Amelia's disappearance. There were dozens of calls, some lasting only a few seconds, others stretching into long, quiet conversations late into the night. This alone wouldn't have been suspicious. Many people stay in contact with their staff. But the frequency of these calls, paired with the timing of some of them during moments when Amelia was away or when she had been asleep, started to paint a troubling picture. As investigators dug deeper into Sofia's background, they discovered that she had been more involved in the family's life than anyone had realized. Sofia had joined the Jacobs family just 2 years before Amelia's disappearance, at a time when Lucas's frequent business trips were increasing. At first, she had been just a quiet, efficient housekeeper, blending into the background. But as the months went on, her relationship with Lucas had subtly shifted from employer-employee to something much more personal. The police found that Sofia had been living in the guest house on the property, a setup that allowed her to be there whenever Lucas needed her. The affair had started innocuously, a few glances exchanged in the kitchen, brief touches as they passed each other. But over time, the relationship between Lucas and Sofia deepened. They began to confide in each other more, sharing moments of vulnerability and slowly unraveling their emotions. Amelia's increasing isolation had made it easier for the two of them to grow closer. What had started as a simple affair soon evolved into a dangerous, calculated plot. The attraction between the two was undeniable, and it didn't take long for them to realize they wanted more than just a secret affair. They wanted to be together, free of the constraints that Amelia represented in their lives. By the time the police uncovered these details, it was clear that the affair wasn't just a symptom of an unhappy marriage. It was the catalyst for something much darker. Lucas and Sofia had grown desperate, wanting Amelia out of the picture for good. They had begun to plan her disappearance long before the night she vanished. Lucas's business trips were carefully timed to coincide with moments when Amelia would be alone. Sofia's role in the plot was now becoming clearer. She had acted as both a confidant and an accomplice, offering support to Lucas as he orchestrated the disappearance of his wife. But there were still no concrete pieces of evidence linking either Lucas or Sofia to Amelia's actual disappearance. The investigation seemed to be running in circles. Then one evening, a breakthrough occurred. The police received an anonymous tip, an unsettling, cryptic message suggesting that someone close to the Jacobs family knew far more than they were letting on. The tipster claimed that on the night Amelia vanished, they had seen Lucas and Sofia together in the house late into the evening, acting suspiciously. According to the source, Sofia had been seen leaving the house just hours before Amelia was reported missing, but the housekeeper hadn't gone home. Instead, she had driven to a remote area near the outskirts of town. With this new information, the police began to piece together a more disturbing timeline. The night Amelia disappeared was not the random occurrence Lucas had claimed. In fact, it had been the culmination of months of planning. Amelia had been more perceptive than anyone had realized, and she had begun to suspect that something was off. She had confronted Lucas about his late nights, his strange behavior, and his growing distance, but Lucas had been quick to reassure her, expertly dodging her questions. The mounting pressure on both him and Sofia had reached a breaking point. The investigation now took on a new urgency. With their growing suspicion, the police began to track down the locations mentioned in the tip, starting with the remote area near where Sofia had been seen. What they uncovered there would change the course of the investigation, and Amelia's fate forever. After months of searching with no sign of Amelia, the breakthrough came in a way no one could have expected. A body, buried deep in a remote area, was discovered by a group of hikers several miles away from the Jacobs family's mansion. The remains, concealed beneath the earth and covered with foliage, had clearly been there for some time. When authorities arrived at the scene, the forensic team quickly confirmed that the body was indeed Amelia Jacobs. The news was devastating, yet it was also the missing piece of the puzzle that investigators had been desperately searching for. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, severe injuries to the head, consistent with a violent attack. The location of the body was particularly chilling. The spot where Amelia had been buried was secluded, hidden away in a patch of forest that only someone familiar with the area would have known. This revelation immediately pointed the finger back at the Jacobs family's household. It was clear that the person responsible for her death had intimate knowledge of the property, and it was unlikely that Amelia had ventured out there on her own. With the discovery of Amelia's body, the investigation began to shift into overdrive. The police started to piece together the last known movements of both Lucas and Sofia on the night of Amelia's disappearance. Both had been unaccounted for during the crucial window of time when the murder likely took place. While Lucas's alibis had always seemed suspicious, it was now evident that he had played a far larger role than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation delved deeper, a series of critical clues began to emerge. The police uncovered surveillance footage that showed Sofia's car parked near the area where Amelia's body was found on the very night she vanished. The footage was grainy, but there was no mistaking the car. It was registered to Sofia, and it had been parked in the same isolated location where Amelia's remains were later discovered. Sofia had tried to cover her tracks, but the evidence was damning. Sofia's role in Amelia's murder had now become clear. She had been the accomplice in a cold and calculated plot orchestrated by Lucas. But the truth of their relationship and the depth of their betrayal was more horrifying than anyone had realized. Lucas had used Sofia as both a lover and a pawn, in a twisted scheme to rid himself of his wife. The affair had not simply been about passion. It had evolved into something much darker, driven by greed and a desire for control. Investigators discovered that Lucas had been struggling financially. Despite his outward success, he had debts, investments gone bad, and a desperate need to secure his future. Sofia, too, had her reasons for wanting Amelia out of the picture. The affair had given her a taste of the life she thought she deserved: luxury, comfort, and a future with Lucas. But when Amelia began to suspect what was happening, the situation became unbearable for both of them. Their once hidden affair had now turned into a life-or-death situation. In their eyes, Amelia had to be removed from the equation, and with her gone, Lucas and Sofia would be free to live the life they had imagined. As more details emerged, it became clear that Amelia had begun to suspect her husband's betrayal in the weeks leading up to her death. She had found proof of the affair and had even confronted Sofia. It was likely that Amelia had confronted Lucas as well, but he had expertly dismissed her concerns. The tension in their home had been mounting for months, but Amelia had no idea that the stakes were far higher than infidelity alone. She had no way of knowing that her life was in danger. With the discovery of Amelia's body, the case had taken a chilling turn. The police now had enough evidence to arrest both Lucas and Sofia. Their carefully constructed lives were about to unravel in the most public of ways. Yet, the most disturbing aspect of the case wasn't the murder itself. It was the calculated, methodical way in which Lucas and Sofia had planned and executed Amelia's death. What had begun as a secret affair had grown into a scheme that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. The tragic end of Amelia Jacobs was now a horrifying reminder of the lengths to which some people would go to hide their darkest desires. As the case against Lucas and Sofia developed, the courtroom became a place of intense drama and revelation. The arrest of the two individuals who had once seemed so ingrained in the life of the Jacobs family sent shockwaves through the community. Lucas, once a beloved businessman and father, was now a man facing charges of conspiracy, murder, and deceit. Sofia, the quiet housekeeper who had been trusted by the Jacobs family, was now an accomplice in a brutal crime. The truth that emerged in the following weeks was more twisted than anyone could have imagined. The trial began with the prosecution outlining the methodical nature of the crime. They presented evidence of Lucas's secret meetings with Sofia, the calculated manipulation he used to get her to play a role in his plot, and the financial strain that had motivated him to murder his wife. It was clear from the outset that Lucas had been the mastermind of the entire scheme. He had used Sofia, preying on her feelings for him, making promises of a future together, a life without Amelia standing in their way. Sofia's role in the Ebol murder was as disturbing as it was tragic. Under intense pressure from the prosecution, she finally confessed to her part in the crime, breaking down during her testimony. Sofia admitted that she had never intended for things to go as far as they did, but over time Lucas had convinced her that Amelia was standing in the way of their happiness. She had been led to believe that Amelia was an obstacle to a life of luxury and security that she had only dreamed of. It was a story of manipulation, deceit, and emotional control. Sofia spoke of how Lucas had made her feel special and desired, a stark contrast to her lonely, isolated life. She had been promised a future with him, a future that never materialized because in Lucas's eyes, Amelia had to die for that future to exist. But it wasn't just Sofia's confession that painted a damning picture. It was Lucas's calculated actions after Amelia's disappearance. The prosecution showed that after Amelia was killed, Lucas had continued to live his life as if nothing had happened. He went about his business, attending meetings, caring for the children, and even playing the role of the grieving husband when in public. Yet behind the scenes he was planning his future with Sofia, moving forward as if his wife's death had been nothing more than a nuisance to him. His emotional coldness and manipulation had been a constant theme throughout the investigation, and it was now evident to all that he had orchestrated his wife's murder without a second thought. In the defense's argument, Lucas's lawyers attempted to paint him as a man who had been driven to madness by an unhappy marriage and financial pressure. They tried to shift the blame onto Sofia, claiming that she had been the one to escalate the affair into something more dangerous. But it was a hard argument to sustain. The evidence of Lucas's active role in the plot, his financial troubles, and his desire to escape his life with Amelia were undeniable. The defense could not refute the fact that Lucas had been the one to pull the strings and make the final deadly decisions. As the trial progressed, more of Lucas's affairs came to light, revealing a pattern of manipulation and deceit that stretched back years. He had used his charm and charisma to manipulate not only Sofia but other women in his life, promising them futures that were never meant to come to fruition. His public persona of the perfect family man was nothing more than a facade, one that concealed a darker side, one that had ultimately led to the death of his wife. The final twist in the case came when it was revealed that Lucas had planned Amelia's murder for months, carefully setting the stage for a moment when he could dispose of her without arousing suspicion. It wasn't just a crime of passion, it was a cold, calculated decision to rid himself of an obstacle and take control of his future. His ultimate goal was clear: a life with Sofia, free of the burdens of his past, regardless of the cost. The verdict was a formality. Both Lucas and Sofia were found guilty of murder. Lucas was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Sofia received a lesser sentence for her role in the crime, though many believed she had been just as complicit in the murder as Lucas Amelia Jacobs' death had been the tragic result of a combination of emotional manipulation, betrayal, and greed. The perfect family once held up as a beacon of success, had been torn apart by secrets and lies. The community would never forget the case, but for the Jacobs children, the scars would remain long after the trial had ended. The horror of what had happened to their mother and the betrayal of their father would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The story of Lucas and Sofia was a reminder that sometimes the darkest secrets lie just beneath the surface of even the most seemingly perfect lives. What had started as a quiet affair had escalated into a tragedy, and in the end, it had cost an innocent life. The consequences of their actions were irreversible, and the true cost of their betrayal would be felt for generations to come.